Hey guys, and welcome to the Grow Podcast. We are so happy that you are here today, listening in to this podcast brought to you by the Landis Grow Solution Center. I'm Ashley, your host through the grain segment of this podcast, and today I have Jim Engler with me, one of our merchandisers here on the Landis team, and we're just going to give you kind of a recap of how harvest has gone so far, kind of what we're seeing for conditions, and then I really want Jim to talk to us a little bit about 2024 because it really feels like a lot of our farmers aren't quite thinking about 2024 yet. So listen in, whether you're in your combine today or listening on the road. We know it's a busy time for everybody. So Jim, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah,
You've been here a few times.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself in case people haven't met you.
Sure. I'm Jim Engler. I work on the grain merchandising team here, helping to manage the risk and trade the bushels for the co-op.
Yeah. And you are really, so I don't know if you guys are like broken into segments at all, but you mostly cover our Western business unit. Is that correct?
Yep. So my primary focus is everything west of Interstate 35. I also, manage our risk from a hedging perspective, making sure that we're, taking care of our risks and any sort of positions that we have on. So
okay, perfect. So today it is sunny, beautiful. We're in Des Moines. On my way up here, I felt like there was a lot of combines rolling. I'm headed north this weekend, which is going to be really fun to see that bean progress. So let's talk a little bit about crop progress as we think about harvest so far in our area.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of got off to a funny start, right? I mean, we had the blast furnace that kind of hit us there in August, and very little, if any, rain, which really sped this crop along.
Mm-hmm.
And we were dumping new crop grains, that first week of September in a lot of locations. And you kind of had this fits and starts, right? You'd have a field that was ready, but the next one might not be ready for another week, right?
Yep.
So you'd go get that one, and then you'd have to wait some time. So we've been in harvest mode for, we're sitting here on October 5th, right? We've been in harvest mode for almost a month, and we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Right? Now the good news is, we've been, Mother Nature's straightened out for us, and we've gotten to the point where we're green flag racing on a lot of things, right? We're our biggest bean days are probably behind us at this point. We probably are, as a state, probably somewhere around 70% done or so on the bean harvest. Some areas are 100% done, and some areas are probably got half of them to go.
Yeah.
The yield wise and the quality of the beans, we're happy with it, right? There's definitely been some variability, which is to be expected given the weather pattern that we had over the growing season.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen areas that had the rain, and you've seen areas that haven't, and that's been reflected in yield. But all in all, a nice Iowa yield. I don't know that I would sit here and call it a record by any means, but a really good, strong showing in beans for sure.
Yeah, well, I think we can both sit here today and be really thankful that we're out of all this crazy quick ship stuff that went on for about a month.
Yeah, and we still see it in the corn market, right?
Yep.
Because we're probably 10 to 20% harvested on this corn crop,
Yep.
right? And so we still see it. And this is, when you see a quick ship bid, right, that is because the pipelines on both of these commodities, both corn and beans, were so dry coming into this harvest season. I mean, really, that the crop speeding up was, if you're an end user, that was a good thing. You needed to get to that next crop as soon as you could, and that allowed them to do that. But there is still some of that quick ship out there, and it's one thing that a grower in the right area can take advantage of, right? And when you think about, if you're an end user and you're paying a quick ship number, how much corn can you get to me by Friday, for example, or whatever that day is, right? You're not really buying the grain. I mean, you are. Yeah. But you're really buying the logistics that farmer's providing, right? You're buying the fact you're buying the fact that they're willing to go combine the corn. You're buying the truck that it's going to show up in. That's where the premium number is. They're not paying up for your corn because they like you. They're paying up because you're going to haul the corn to them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I am certainly glad that most of that is behind us to keep track of all the different offers that were out there, especially kind of that second week of September was wild.
Yeah, it really is, and hopefully a lot of people got to take advantage of it,
Yeah.
because that's, the we always say in this business, the margins in the hustle, and there was
Hmm.
a lot of hustle margin to be made
Yeah.
in these early quick ship premiums.
So speaking of corn, I was on a call this morning, and they're talking a little bit about corn moistures coming in so far. It sure feels like this corn, this last heat spell that we had, it's going to be dry.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're I think our average inbound so far, and some of this gets skewed, right, because
Hmm.
guys running through the dryer at home, or maybe there's some old crop that needed to sneak
Yeah.
in there at the beginning, right? But I mean, I think our average moisture is somewhere around 17-18% on this corn, and sitting here on October 5th, I mean, that's a really really low number
Hmm.
for us. It's um, it just the way that kind of Mother Nature dealt us, right?
Yeah.
Which should be good for pace, right? That should allow us to get through this crop, and knock this harvest out.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say it, near the start of October, but it kind of feels like we're not going to have that many guys probably going into November if the weather stays kind of true to what it looks like here.
Yeah, it's green flag racing, right? The
Yeah.
forecast supports running hard. And the good news is that because of the inverse, because of the tight supplies that we had
Mhm.
last year, elevators are empty, right?
Yeah.
The farm bins are
Yeah.
empty. The biggest challenges that you have, in a crop like what we're looking at, which is an above average crop, it's a good crop.
Hmm.
You start to run into space constraints, you start to run into not enough trucking power, those types of things. A lot of those have probably been alleviated because of the emptiness of the grain handling system,
Hmm.
because of the somewhat drawn outness of this harvest too. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, we've been in harvest mode for 30 days, and we still got 80% of the corn crop left to go.
Yeah.
So, some of that corn's already disappeared, right? We
Mhm.
used it, right? We turned it into ethanol, we turned it into feed, it left the state in a rail car. That stuff is, that just creates space.
Yeah.
And that should help this harvest just keep right on going.
So one thing that we talked about a lot when we had our last podcast, which was kind of the crop tour results, there's a ton of concern, right, about test weight. I'm throwing this at you. So if we're not far enough in, it's fine. And, we're only sitting here at the beginning of October, but it feels like the wet corn had some test weight issues on it early. But how are we feeling now?
I don't view test weight as an issue.
Yeah.
And the spidey senses were going off early, because typically when you're, if you're shelling corn in August or early days of September, like there's a problem,
Yeah.
right, with that product. And I think we've gotten far enough along into it. I don't see test weight as an issue. We're not going to have a problem making U.S. #2 quality based on test weight. Is it as heavy as we historically see it? No. Is it the 58 to 60 pounds that we've gotten ourselves accustomed to over the last couple of years? It's not. It's 57, maybe 58, right?
Mhm.
So it is a little bit lighter.
Mm-hmm.
But from a quality perspective, this crop looks like it should be able to store decently well.
Okay, so moving in, everyone's favorite topic here as far as origination and merchandising goes. The farmer was really, really, really weakly sold going into this harvest, right? And so I think it was just honestly hard for customers to make a decision. And then by the time they felt the panic of, I've got to make a decision, the market had really fallen off. So talk to us. I mean, we went into this harvest with really historic low sales coming in. What's the farmer do?
Yeah, I mean it and I completely understand how we got to that
Mhm.
historically undersold type level, because there was a big inverse in the market. So why would you sell the back end? If corns were $7 today, why would my corn in fall not be
Mhm.
$7, right? And paired with a growing season that really, we needed the rains, we got
Yeah.
them, but it wasn't always perfect. It was far from a perfect growing season, right?
Yeah.
And so what level of sold are you based on what you think you're going to grow? That number was changing every day in the farmer's mind. So I completely understand how we got there. So what do you do now, right? What we're seeing a lot of, is the farmer retaining title to that grain, right? They're not making sales. They're choosing for some sort of storage price later. A lot of it's going to be going home to the farm. And I think that's an okay decision. I don't have a problem with that. I think there's reasons to look for a better day. I think those better days, there's reasons to make an argument for better prices.
Yeah.
There's reasons to make argument for lower prices too. But I think we will have a shot to sell some grain at better prices than what we see today. Now, am I sitting here telling you $6-7? No, that's not what I'm prophesizing, right? But
we'll hold you to it.
I don't mind the idea of retaining some title to this crop. The important thing that I remind growers is if you're gonna store your crop, right, you have expenses that are going to go against it. You are out of free time. The second you turn your combine on, you're out of free time. And now you've got to, now you're going to start incurring costs, whether you're paying commercial storage at the elevator, whether you're taking it home and storing it yourself. And the biggest thing that we don't talk about that hasn't been a factor for a long time is the interest expense.
Yeah,
right?
huge.
It is a huge expense. And even if you're on a farm that doesn't have a lot of notes or a lot of interest expense on their incomes, a lot of banks will pay you 4 to 5%, on a 3-month CD, right? So there's opportunity costs that needs to be factored in. And, if you want to call your beans a $12.50 commodity, if you can make 5% interest at the bank, you're talking 5 cents a month. So I don't mind the idea of storing some grain here. I think there's probably some better days, but you've got to be very cognizant of the risk that you are taking and the expenses that are going to go against it. There's an old saying, right? Not trading is a trading decision. By not choosing to sell your crop, you've made a trading decision, and that's okay. But you've got to realize that risk. The other old saying that comes to mind about this is, the farmer's got to be a risk manager. Anybody that runs a business needs to be a risk manager, whether you're farming or feeding cattle, or if you run the local bakery, right? Your job is risk management. Risk management doesn't mean risk avoidance.
Yeah.
It means that you see the risk, you acknowledge the risk, you identify the risk, and you quantify the risk. When you put that grain in that bin or you're paying commercial storage, you need to have an exit strategy for that, right? And hope is not a strategy.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other point too, we had a conversation before we started this of let's not forget all the inputs that went into this crop, right? And this is not the agronomy podcast, and we won't try to explain anything on that.
We'll leave that to John.
But, I think it's important, right? Thinking back, okay, I have this crop and maybe it's better yielding than what I expected, but still, what was your break even from those inputs? And where do you need to be? And does your higher yield make up for that? And that's a conversation I'm having a lot this fall, is especially kind of right south of here, that market is seeing really great yield. And so, okay, I'm getting 30 or 40 bushels to the acre, way better than my great years. So I don't need that $5 break even anymore, right? But I think that's one thing that I'm nervous that customers are going to maybe forget about is inputs for this next year look a lot lower. So I can take a lower price, but remember, right,
there's two things there, right? It's always easier to do it with more bushels, right? You want more units to sell. Any business wants more units to sell. Yeah, of course. Right? And the other thing, too, is, to your point, this crop that we're combining right now, it was an expensive one to put in the ground.
Yeah.
And you've got to, and when you make that storage decision, you've got to ask yourself, how much more money do I want to put towards this crop? Whether it's an interest expense, running the fans on the bin at home, the extra freight, the extra diesel fuel, that you're going to incur. And all those things are fine. You just have to identify them. You have to point them out and say, these are the risks that I'm willing to take because I think of this opportunity. So, again, you've got to risk management does not mean risk aversion.
Yeah.
It means acknowledging it and identifying it.
Yeah. So I think for some of our customers, just, as an originator here at Landis, a few things that, be my opinion, and Jim, chime in here. But, if you've got things that are in our facility or in your bin, but for sure they're in our facility, let us be working a cash offer, a futures offer. Those things trigger, whether it's during the day or during, night trade. So those are beautiful to be knowing what you need and then it just working. And then you don't think about it anymore. You can go wherever this winter and we'll call you if it hits.
It's my favorite contract that we offer. Is that offer contract, because you've put out a plan. You've put out an exit strategy, right? and that it also helps to take some of the emotion out of it.
It does,
Right?
yeah.
I find myself guilty of this too, right? I mean, I trade for a living. That's what I do. Um, I find myself, when it's getting close to the number that I have in mind, well, what if it goes higher?
Yeah.
Right? And it's very easy to succumb to that.
Yeah.
But with the offer, it happens, and you've taken the emotional thought out of it. That's why it's one of my favorite contracts, because it's an emotionless contract, right?
Yeah.
You've set a goal, and you should hope that offer triggers because you have 3 more ahead of it, right?
For sure.
That means the next one's more likely to trigger.
Yeah.
Right? So.
And I mean, same story, right? This stuff is stored in your bin. If you're looking at a local ethanol plant, chances are we can work that offer for you as well and direct ship it, or put a cash offer in to haul it in, later in December or January. So that would be my biggest, recommendation, I think, to our grower is don't forget about the crop, whether it's in your bin or in commercial storage, which I think is funny for us to say that, but it's very true, right? Like,
I mean, you can't fall in love with it.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and it's very easy to do.
Yeah.
It is extremely easy to do, to fall in love with a position, to fall in love with a crop. But you can't fall in love with it. This is a business, and you at the end of the day, you got to make a decision.
Yeah.
Right? And again, I'll go back to that saying of not trading is a trading decision. It's a fine trading decision to make, but you got to know that you're making a decision not to sell that crop today.
Mm-hmm. So that, I guess for me kind of wraps up talking about harvest progress. I really want to hone in now on 2024 stuff, because I don't know about you, I'm slightly nervous as we move into 2024. And again, just the indecision that's happening right now, I think with most of our customers just not really knowing where to start if they haven't, getting their mind kind of geared towards next year, especially, right? A lot of these inputs have been booked. Seed costs are written in, fall fertilizer prices are written in. So you kind of have a pretty good baseline of where you're going to be. So throw it at us, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, I think, anytime you're going out and booking an input for your crop, right? Whether it be anhydrous or seed or chem, whatever it is, right? The best marketers of grain that I see on the farm level, they convert that in their mind to how many bushels per acre is that at the current price. And that number changes every day because the market goes up and down, right? But they're converting that to, okay, if I need to sell anhydrous, if I'm going to buy anhydrous and incur an expense, I need to offset that with some revenue.
Yeah.
And by selling grain, I need to sell, at today's price, I would need to sell X amount of bushels. Now, they don't always do it one for one, and that's okay. All right. But they're very cognizant of that. It's going to cost, this anhydrous, a lot of people go back to dollars per acre, but I really like dollars per bushel as that metric. And what we've seen specifically in the corn crop, this doesn't really apply to beans. Actually, it doesn't apply to beans at all. But with the corn market, going into, what we would call almost a dead carry, right? Where this, where current DEES is worth less than next year's DEES. You harken back to 4 or 5 years ago, right, when we were in these dead carry type scenarios. Some of the best sales that we would see from farmers were when they're in their combine selling the crop for next year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you're able to take advantage of that carry, right? I mean, there's 25 to 30 cents between the two DEES contracts. And it's not a carry unless you sell it.
Yeah.
So, I really like the idea of getting a baseline on, right? And maybe it's just as simple as like, okay, I've committed to my seed cost. It's going to cost me X amount of bushels per acre. Why don't I go cover some of that or all of it, right? In any business, right? Anytime you incur an expense, you want to offset that with revenue. So I really like getting out here. Don't sell it all, right? I mean, you should, leave some dry powder. There's a lot of stories to be written, especially when we look at the bean market, right? I mean, you got, we're looking at tight carryouts. Now we can debate about how tight this current crop that we're combining right now, how tight that carryout's going to be. There's a lot of people that want to say, the USDA has us, in the 250 type range. There's a lot of people that want to argue that there needs to be 300 or 400 million carryout. And there's a lot of people that say, it's less than 250. And a lot of that's going to hinge on exports. But, when we look towards the next year, we're going to have more crush coming online. We're going to, for the next couple of years, every year, we're going to add crush capacity in this country. And the demand for beans domestically is going up. Now, the trick is internationally, how do we compete on the export level. But today I'm not a farmer, right? I don't that's not what I do, right? Um, but I'm guessing that the numbers are telling you to plant corn, and I don't think the market can support that necessarily. I think the bean market is going to need to buy some acres. Now, the trick is it buying, U.S. acres, or is it buying, Brazilian acres or Argentinian acres? But
Yeah.
I do think the bean market needs to probably buy some acres. But again, when we're talking about, offsetting your expenses with revenue, you can look at the bean pit and use that November futures in an HTA contract, right, to start to cover some of that, even if you don't want to lock in the basis yet. So
Exactly. And I think, to our farmers, whether you're, like I said, in a combine listening to this, thinking that's the last of my concerns is marketing my 2024 crop.
You're just wondering where the grain cart guy is.
Seriously, where's my catcher? I mean, call your originator, have a conversation. What are my options? A lot of my customers are, like you said, looking at just a futures option, whether that be selling straight hedge derives or futures only contracts, which we call them here, or even looking at an accumulator or something like that. There's plenty of options if you're like, cash is not my game. I don't like that number. I think the other thing that's going to be really interesting is there's a long fight, as you mentioned, acres. There's a long fight. There's quite a bit of time here before March. March is always a fun month here at the end of the month. When those acres numbers are kind of
when we get the perspective of planting acres.
Yes.
It's the next few years, that March 31st report is going to be very, very interesting to see how we transition from, how do we get more soybean acres domestically, but we're still competing with the Brazilian, soybean production that, their acreage grows every year, right? So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how that market plays out over the next 3 years.
Okay. What else, Jim?
I think, again, if you take anything away from this, just understand what your risks are. Understand the costs that are going into storing this grain that you're storing on the farm. Make sure you're keeping it in good quality, and this is the time of year where you've got a lot of things going on, right? You're making sure the truck's getting back to the field. Is the dryer still running? What are the hours at the local facility? This is where you lean on your co-op, right? You lean on your grain marketing experts. You lean on, the location manager, right? To say, hey, we're combining. What are your hours, right? And making sure that, we're all in this together, right? We want you guys to have a successful harvest. We want to have a successful harvest. We want to fill our bins, and it's a team effort, right? That communication goes both ways, and if there's things that the co-op can do for you, you just communicate them to us. We're here to help you guys get this crop out of the field and get as much for it. So
yeah, I think that's a great point. If you're listening, call your locations ahead of delivery. That's always helpful. And when your time comes to settle, be sure to let us know. You're taking cash. Do we need to defer that contract? Any and all communication is always loved by us. So definitely keep in really great contact with us. And our Growth Solution Center is always open. So if you can't get a hold of someone at your location, they may be busy running the scale or doing all the other things. Feel free to give those people a call, and usually there's someone right available for you. Well, Jim, I think that's all we got. We knew it would be short and sweet. We don't want to bother these guys too long.
Absolutely. We got to go find that grain cart guy, right? So.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for the Grain or Agronomy podcast episode. Thanks.